yeah, please. Give me technology.
Yeah, that's good. Don't have a minute, only takes a minute.
All right. Excellent. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I particularly enjoy the round robin, the quick. I think it's a very helpful thing, particularly in the space we're in right now. As Ken mentioned, I spent a huge part of my career doing market research and trying to figure out what people think and trying to connect with people and get their stories. And one of the truisms I learned as I went through this was that, I started out somewhere north of 30 years ago doing this, and it used to be you put together a research report and it'd be like 76 pages long. Ta-da, look at this, and it's dense with all sorts of stuff. And then I started realizing, probably too late along the way, that nobody's reading the 75 pages. It's like, nobody wants that. They want to hear, curate it for me. Tell me what the story is. Tell me what's important, and tell me what I should do. Give me enough information to allow me to make decisions and move on with my life. So, anyway, after 30 years of this, I found myself at age 55, not uncommon for a lot of folks, that you're too old, you're getting paid too much money, it's time for the next generation to take over. So I went through a fair amount of, and believe me, I've been through career transition before. Part of being in marketing is that you accept that part of the deal is every 6 or 7 years, or every 10 years, you're going to have a little respite where you're not sure what you're going to do, and then you land, and then it's good. This time was different. Age 55 is kind of a hard time to be looking to get it back into the industry, particularly from the perspective that what I had been doing had evolved so much in recent years. If you think about the kind of things that are going on in the marketing world and just the way people communicate, it isn't just mobile device research or social media research, and now it's predictive analytics. If I don't even have to ask you something, I don't want to ask you something. It all got to the point where when I started interviewing for positions, people would look at me and say, yeah, you don't have the skill set I'm looking for because it doesn't come in a body that old. And that's the way it goes. But what I found along the way as I was doing that was I was in this prolonged search, and I was working with a coach, and she says to me, well, what are you passionate about? I said, I'm really, pardon the expression, really angry. And she said, well, we'll work with that. So I pitched a project to the business school, and I said, I'm a researcher by training, so that's my hammer, right? And I don't really love the whole networking process, and I know I'm going to have to rely on that. But I reached out to the dean of the business school and said, it's been 16 years since I was out doing this, and a lot has changed. The whole job search process is much different. Am I starting to look like Ken when I'm using my hand? Anyway, a lot has changed. And the reality of it is it's broken to a large degree, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But just from my backstory perspective, I reached out to him and said, it would be real, so much now is a function of people figuring out how to network. And we'll talk about some of the statistics along the way. But networking is a very difficult thing for many people. Assume that half the population is introverted. Assume that another big chunk of the population is extroverted, but hasn't really figured out how to rein themselves in. One of the hallmarks of extroverts, and I lean, I guess I'm an ambivert, but on the extrovert side, I'm more likely to think or speak before I think, which can get you in all sorts of trouble when you're up in front of a group. Anyway, so I reached out to the guy and I said, look, it strikes me that so much of this is a function of finding your own voice and figuring out what's the right path, and how do you express yourself, and how do you find a way that you're comfortable where you're really projecting who you are? Because that's what people want. Ultimately, that's who you want to be. You want to be sincere about that. Yeah. Anyway, so my pitch was, I would love to reach out to our alumni base, people who've been successfully navigating their careers and obviously been in one place or another, and find out what's your secret. So I got to go ahead. I reached out to 60 people in the DC area, ended up interviewing 20 of them, right? And for each of them, I got them to agree to have me come to their place, or they come to my place. I would videotape it, which is kind of daunting, as you can tell. And I sat down there and just stationary camera and asked them their story. And I was really lucky. I got a really good swath of people who were all good storytellers. And I learned an awful lot from it. So I ended up going back and saying, okay, now I've got this 20 hours of video. I went back and I went into the studio and I sliced it all up because, again, going back to the 76 pages doesn't fly anymore. People in similar vein don't want to go through a 90-minute YouTube to figure out how to fix a dishwasher if it's a 3-minute fix, you know. So cut to the chase, curate it. So I sliced it up, and at any rate, I came up with 15 different tranches of, you know, here's how people, if they're looking for a job, here's how they prepare for an interview. If they're looking to hire somebody, here's what they're looking for. If they're using LinkedIn, here's how they do it. Here's how they approach setting up networking meetings, etc. Kind of a how-to type of thing. Ended up curating it, putting it together. It now is on the website of the school. Anyway, the reason I mention this is because that was the jumping off point for me. I started down this path. I had nothing take me down this path except that I really got energized by it. And when you're in career transition, being energized by something is really something to pay attention to. So then I started, you know, that ends up going up on the school's website. And I get a call from the woman who I work with, and she says, hey, I got something else for you. I want you to set up a program like they have. Duke in New York has this program. It's called Duke New York Advanced Job Networking Group. We've got to find a better name for it. So they said, hey, we'd like to see you do something like that in DC because there's 14,000 Duke alumni in this area. Wow. So I'm like, okay. Well, I went back out on LinkedIn. I found people who could help me, and I started the thing process in the span of, I think we just had our 26th monthly meeting. But ended up, then that led to something else, and that to something else. And I don't want to bore you with my whole story, but eventually I ended up doing career transition coaching for Lee Hecht Harrison. And, you know, I really love it. It's really gratifying. I really enjoy it. I met great people. I mean, just people, it's wonderful to be out there and be part of it. And I'll tell you, I come to the end of the day, and I'm like, wow, day's over already. And there's not that many jobs you can do where you get that kind of feeling. I'm not trying to recruit for Lee Hecht Harrison. I'm just saying, for me, it was, there's something in it, there's something about this that is all about me. Anyway, so now that I've stalled long enough, it's time to use the technology. So for career transition, a challenge you have is the system's broken. You know, it's funny, in spite of what you hear about, no offense to the Department of Labor, but it's not the Department of Labor who quotes the only one that actually looks good every time is that the, you know, it doesn't look good every time, but the one that puts it in the best light, which is basically, what's the,
You're talking about the
unemployment rate.
The unemployment rate?
Yeah, basically, which doesn't account for people who are past 6 months, because once you don't click unemployment anymore, you're not considered unemployed. Go figure that. Anyway, but if I'm in somebody in leadership position and it's been this way forever, that's the one we quote. So anyway, the process is broken, right? In spite of all that, it having rosy numbers, you still have a huge number of job listings out there. You still have a huge number in the applicant pool. Then, in addition to that, you got things like ATSs and word search, keyword search that make sure that humans never actually look at the resumes. And that make you guys feel good so far. And still, employees end up hiring. They got all this means to identify the 5 people that are completely fulfill their bill. Well, the reality is, they don't hire those folks. They typically hire somebody who's a known commodity, somebody either who's an internal candidate or knows somebody there. So, you know, basically, LinkedIn had a survey about a year ago, came out and said that somewhere in the order of 75% of the people who land jobs land them through networking. Now, understand that's LinkedIn putting it out there, but I don't think they're far wrong. And the reality is, you know, you're out there doing all this application, right? And it's just what we kiddingly refer to as where hope goes to die. Because basically you answer all the questions. They say that if you're hitting 3% rate, 3% response rate, you're doing well. Let's translate that. That means 97% of the resumes or the things you fill out go nowhere. That's not a strong hit rate. So anyway, again, and I put yikes here because going back to that whole comment about I'm just exhausted about going to another cattle call and meeting people and telling them about why. Here's my sad little story about where I am, and this is me projecting back on me. You've got to come to terms with it, and frankly, part of what this is figuring out how can I make this process work for me. So it's still more appropriate. The other thing I say, even more than ever, was I was talking to a coach a couple weeks ago, and I said, you know, the process is broken. She says it always was. And I'm like, so well, let's think about this for a minute. Where is there scientific proof that just because you're a good interviewer is going to make you a good employee?
True.
I mean, look at some of the decisions that get made on a regular basis in the corporate world, wherever. I'd say there's probably a fair amount of doubt on that one, because those folks were good interviewers, apparently. Anyway, here's the other thing I would say. If you look at job postings out there, one thing that becomes clear to you, and as you've gone through the process from the candidate/victim perspective, is that it's clear employers don't know what they're looking for. They will put together a list and you say, okay, let me take a look at the job posting. Is this long, right? And okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. And frankly, that person doesn't exist in nature. Because they're looking for all these different things. Like, for me, it was always market research, and well, I want somebody who can manage 25 people, who's comfortable getting in the department audience and who can do analysis, who's good at mentoring people, who's good at connecting with people, who can do focus groups, and oh, by the way, I also want you to be a statistical whiz on SPSS. I mean, literally, the reality of it is that person doesn't exist. Now, they put it in there. And the other thing is, one of the questions I asked on my little survey, my study I did, how often do you get somebody who fits all the terms? Never. One guy said, there's that in a unicorn. So why do you put it in there? Well, part of this, we want, this is what we want to get. And if you think about the process, and if you ever had the occasion to put together a job posting, part of that is all about, well, let's create a position. What do we have to do? Well, we have to put enough of the wiggly words in there to make it justified so that it gets paid at this level, not at this level. And so oftentimes it works two different ways. One is you get this laundry list of stuff, and the other side of it is when you put it out in wherever you're going to post it, some people look and say, and the reality is when you're in career transition, some days you're going to look and say, that job's a snap. The next day you're going to wake up and say, there's no way in heck I could ever do that job. And what's changed is basically your mindset, right? But again, there's this ridiculous expectation of I've got to fill those seats. The other challenge you have with this is people get down the path and looking at that and saying, yeah, I can be that. The whole job search thing is a lot like dating. I mean, you have in your mind, what your soulmate looks like, and I've got this list of what that ought to be, and miraculously enough, my wife fits all of those. I just want to be clear. You're recording, right? She says the same thing about me. But the reality of it is, you're looking at this list and you're thinking, well, I need to be all those things, and that person needs to be all those things. Well, who do people typically end up, dating or staying with? It's somebody who's different than everybody else, right? And it isn't so much that, yeah, sure, they may have some of the qualifications, certainly. But the other part they have is they're comfortable with who they are and what they are. And there's a certain amount of appeal in that. So if you think about that when you get into the job search thing, a lot of people get out there and say, I can do all those things. Sir?
Yeah, I have a question. I applied for a marketing job, and they said, yeah, well, why don't you write us a marketing plan, a 6-month and a 5-year marketing plan for us, basically for free, and submit it to us as part of your job plan, give it, now that we've done the oral interview, and email it to us as the second part. And I was a little offended because I was like, that's giving you free, I should be paid for this, as suddenly you want client work, but you're suddenly saying, give it to you for free as part of, and then I did that, and then I didn't get the job, but they took my work. What do you recommend when the interviewer says, give us your work?
I like you, am very skeptical. I don't, part of it is you want to figure out where it is in the process, and I've been through the process. Some stuff here. Here's a business case. Give us a writing sample. We'd like you to come in and do a personality test. All that stuff. But the stuff where you're actually giving them work product, I'd be very skeptical. And I don't know what the answer is, because at a certain point you're saying, do I want the job or not? But the other thing I'm a very strong proponent of is when you're talking to employers, if your spidey sense is going off and saying, I don't really like these people, I don't think they're in it for me, I don't think, I feel like there's a fit, I'm starting to feel like they're using me. Listen to those spidey senses. You know, there are other places. One of the things I would say is this: there are opportunities out there, and you folks, one of the things I don't want you to ever lose sight of it is you are fully qualified and competent people. This system just stinks all the way through. It's not fun. It's demeaning. My gosh, you know, every time, you know.
Because I gave it to them thinking, well,
okay,
this is the next phase of the interview process. They need a sample of my work to prove.
And you didn't get it.
And then I was like, they're like, sorry, you didn't get the job. We read your your 6-month and your 5-year marketing plan, and it doesn't meet.
I mean, I don't know
And
what
I
to
was
tell you.
like, really? I stayed up for,
Did you send them a bill afterwards, Gio?
I should have. I burned the midnight hours to do that for them, and I had to do research on them, and I had to do market research for the company, and I was just like, ouch, that sucked.
It does. I don't disagree. And the other side is, there are a fair number of people who post jobs out there that have already been filled.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
That's
what's
already?
the point? Anyway, couple
So
other
you would
things.
say no, don't do that,
Yes.
unless you feel like you are,
Unless you want the job, like
okay.
you want to work with these people, and you feel like, okay, I get it. There's a reason why they're doing it, and it seems sincere.
Okay.
Sir?
Is there a way you could do it and have some sort of agreement where they can't use it? I guess once they know, it's hard to put the genie back in.
Yeah. I think the challenge is how do you do that and also be in an open exchange for part of it. There's the dance that I want to work with you.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to do.
The power dynamic undermines any.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say about it is, this whole temptation about people going down the list and saying, I can do all the things, I can be anything you want me to be. What ends up happening, the net result is part of the reason I think we see this thing broken, is that so much of this process now about figuring out, proving that you have the skills you say you do. I mean, there are programs out there like JobScan. You guys seen JobScan? So JobScan basically compares your resume to the job posting, right? It says, oh, in order for you to get here, now don't write it down. Sorry, this cannot be construed as an endorsement, I'm sorry. JobScan is helpful in a certain respect. But what I fear it does for many people, it leads them down the path of saying, if I just had these 3 things, I'd be at that 80% level, which is a threshold, which means I would be somebody they would consider. The challenge you have,
Be careful.
caveat emptor. The challenge you have here is that you get down the path of watering down what you are and who you are. And let me come back to that in a minute. So,
Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you.
so there are all sorts of wacky things they do. And one of the things this is, as coaches, we run into a lot of folks who are coming through career transition and talking to people on a regular basis to interview. And there are all sorts of war stories you hear about things that have happened and just one nutty than the next. And one I heard about was a candidate who went in for a job and was down to the finals, and they were just about ready to pull the trigger on giving him the offer, but they wanted him to go back. Now, he was still working. We want you to do a 360 with your current employee.
Huh?
Ask them to do a 360. Okay, what's my reason for doing that? What's my employer going to say when I hand them this and say, could you please do a 360? Because the people I'm talking about going to after I work here. Wow. Anyway, okay, the process, here's the other thing though. You look at all this stuff, you got to do a personality test, and I love those things. There are a number of major employers out there. In fact, I'm not going to name any names, but they go out there and say, well, we want to hire people. We've gone and we've done a personality test, and we figured out the types of people who succeed in our organization. Well, it turned out they're all the same type of people. So If you're working in a place that has disruptive change and things are coming down the pike, and there's a little bit of a risk of groupthink there. Anyway, but those types of things go on all the time. The video interview. Sign up for this video interview. There won't be another person on it. You're just going to record yourself, and then we're going to look at it when we get the chance.
Wow.
Because our time is way more important than yours. Writing sample presentations, panel interviews, another one that just, I've had a couple of panel interviews where they had me talk to the people who would be working for me. Awkward dynamic, it's like, when I was astonished that some of these people were asking very direct questions, I'm thinking, if I were talking to somebody who might, 33, 50% chance of being my boss, I'd tread lightly because at the end they may get hired. Anyway, but here's the thing, all this stuff makes the process take that much longer. And you're already dealing with folks who don't know what they want precisely. And to be fair, I understand it, because the world is changing, and the types of skill sets you need are going to be different now than what they were in the future, what they have. So anyway, much more data, they have less time to analyze it. And again, the other thing, you ask them, and I speak with recruiters on a regular basis. One of the questions I ask them all the time is, how much time do you spend looking at an average resume? 10 seconds if you're lucky. Some would say 20 seconds. I've yet to hear somebody say over a minute. So this is going back to my caution about the 75-page report. Really dense resumes, that's not doing it for you. Anyway, again, I come back to 3/4 of the people who land jobs do so through networking, which is huge. And it is helpful. So now what? Given that it's broken, what do you do? Well, first of all, let's start with a couple different points. Self-discovery. What are you good at? And it's not just what are you good at. What are you good at that you love to do? Because the idea then is, if you can fixate on that and you start talking about it, and when people have identified this, and we have exercises we go through, and usually it's kind of some exhaustive list of what are the accomplishments you've had over the years that you're proud of. Now, where I ask people to say is, think about those times when you're really nailing it, and you're thinking, boy, I'm doing this as well as anybody on earth has ever done it. What are you doing then? What are you bringing to the party? Because this is all about figuring out. It isn't about, well, I'm an accounts receivable specialist. It's not about what you do. It's about what you bring to the party. And that is, I could be a consensus builder. I could be a creative problem solver. I could be a really good translator. There are all these different skills that you're going to identify. So typically what we ask folks to do is say, go through and do a list of your accomplishments. Keep going. When you get to the point where you feel like you've got like 3/4 of the way done, stop. And go back and say, what are the patterns you're seeing here? Now, don't limit it to just your professional. It could be your personal life too. What are you seeing that's innately you, that you can't help yourself do? What are you seeing that you consistently bring to the party? What have you learned? So all those things are going to be important because that's going to be your professional sweet spot, right? So you figure out what that is, right? Then you're also going to say, okay, where do I want to go? Then another element of it is saying, okay, I've got my story, I've got who I want to tell it to. What's my medium? How am I going to talk about it? How am I going to express myself? And then again, you're going to have your materials in order, certainly. And then finally, the really important thing from my perspective is build a plan. Once you've got all this stuff down, and you're feeling pretty good. Now, it's not, when you hit this stage of life, oftentimes you're like, bewildered. I'm not going to be doing this anymore. Where does that leave me? Kind of start looking at it from the opportunity side. And I know that's really hard to hear, but it literally is. If you start thinking about saying, well, what could I do? Then that opens up things. And feel free. There's a book called Designing Your Life, written by 2 Stanford professors. It was basically spawned from the most popular course on campus because these 2 guys put together. They used to have the best and the brightest come back after as alums and say, I hate what I do. And they said, this one guy's in the design school, the other guy is in the engineering school. Says, we shouldn't have this happen. We have the best and the brightest. We give them a Stanford education. They go out there and say, we hate what we do. So they put together a course that basically uses the design thinking approach towards identifying different avenues to pursue. And design thinking is a lot about fail early and fail often, try things. So anyway, very interesting. There's a TED Talk on it too if you want even the shorter version, but it's pretty good stuff. So anyway, but part of this, my estimation, is define a mission, build a plan, start figuring out, flesh out that plan. Who do you need to talk to help you figure out if that's right? And a huge part of, I'm a research guy, so a huge part of this plan is going to be research. Figure out where do you go? Build a plan, work the plan, refine it. Lather, rinse, repeat, because this is what this is all about. And the thing is, once you find that you are not sitting at home looking at the computer screen and answering ads for whatever all day long and wondering, you know, as I like to refer to as Charlie Brown hanging out by the mailbox waiting for Valentine's to come. Once you're past that point and doing something and engaged, you're going to feel like you start feeling better about yourself. I had, when I went through this, I had what I call the year of yes. I took on volunteer work. I took courses in design thinking because somebody said, you know what you did is design thinking. I went, really? So I said, I don't know that. So I went out and I took 4 courses and I studied that. I also did an awful lot. I did some consulting work and whatever I could to get out there and be amongst people, because it's hugely important that you don't get isolated. It's important to get out there and remember what it's like to talk to other people. I mean, my mailman used to run from me, so it's important to keep that in mind. So anyway, let's start with the where do you start? How many folks have City Slickers? I'm a big movie fan. There's one point where Curly says, you know, you people come in from the city and you're all messed up because you haven't figured out that, you know, you don't know which is what. So what you got to know is there's one thing. Figure out that one thing. So what's my one thing? You got to figure that out. Okay, I think one thing, maybe this is more apropos, because when you're working in the kind of environment we're working in, where things are changing, you've got to figure out, I'm more than just one note. So you can see he's got 7 fingers. It's a very quick typist too. But anyway, as you start thinking about this goes back to this figuring out what your sweet spot is. What are your core skills? Because the other thing you're going to do is when you're talking about core skills is you're not going to change those core skills. Those are who you are. They are what you're going to flavor your resume with. They're going to how you describe yourself. When somebody says, "Tell me about yourself," how many of you folks love that question? Really? Everybody says, "Oh." And our textbook says, you know, well, you look at it and they throw it at you. And my view of the world is either they're a lazy interviewer or they want to see what they can do with this. But if you look at it from realistic, it's an opportunity to take the ball where you want to go. So part of if you're understanding who you are and understanding what you bring to the party, when somebody starts asking you, tell me about yourself, it isn't you reciting your resume. You can start with, here's what I've done. But what you want to talk about is, here's how I do it, here's why I'm good at it, and here's why I love it. And all that stuff is more from a self-discovery element of it. But the idea is then you're actually giving them a sense of who you are, and you're finding yourself. Because going back to the dating scenario, it's how you appear. It's how confident you appear, and it's how you're different. The person who's going to win that job isn't going to be the one who says, I can do everything you have in here. By and large. First of all, because he doesn't exist. But secondly, it's going to be the person who says, this is who I am. You know, I was talking to a recruiter, and I said, tell me, you know, one of the exercises I speak we go through is when you're looking at an interview, or okay, when you're preparing for an interview, one of the things I ask you to do is take a look at your resume and look at the job posting, and you know, that wacky job posting. Part of it is you're going to look at it and say, okay, what are the 3 things I need to know about me? This is where you tailor what you know about you from the 5 to 12 things that. I'm surprised you're still here, John. It's like, I've got to hear this every time I talk to him. Anyway, the idea is this. You tailor it. It's marketing. I don't tell you the 5 to 12 things. I tell you those 3 things that seem to be most important to you that are right in my daily life. Mm-hmm. And what I do is I know that given that I'm going to have a conversation with you that is likely 20 minutes to half an hour, I don't have a whole lot more time to tell you other stuff. But I'm going to tell you these 3 things. You are going to know that before I leave. And you know what? I'm going to have stories for it. Because stories are your stock in trade. They are proof. They make you more interesting, and they make you more memorable. And part of what you do in a story is, and we call them, well, I'm not going to call this, but part of what you're looking at isn't just, here's my accomplishment, here's what I've done, but it's also, here's how I approached it. Because if I'm sitting there across the table from you and I'm the hiring manager, all I'm thinking is, to a large degree, is, you know, A, what's for lunch, and B, this is the person going to take the headaches off my shoulder, right? And that person that's going to take the headaches off my shoulder is going to be, at some point, not under my supervision. So I'm going to want to know how they think and what they do. Are they going to be a disruptor in a good way or a bad way? Are they going to be taking the ball and running with it? So when you start telling them stories, it should speak to a little bit about your thought process. And at the end of it, you know, you're going to come away equally important. When you stick the dismount, it's all about, and I told you this story because you're connecting the dots for them. You're saying, because I know the challenges you guys are wrestling with in this would be a skill or a trait that would be very helpful. Make sense? Okay, those fingers are starting to bother me. Okay, again, focus on the opportunity. The other side of this is, look, this is an opportunity to recalibrate, right? You know, from my perspective, I ended up going in a, you know, at least a 90-degree turn. But it was helpful for me to know what I was doing. I'm going to get there at some point, too. But here's the thing you're going to ask yourself. Do I want to continue in the same vein? Is there an opportunity? Secondly, are my skills and experience valued? Will they? How much longer will they be valued? You know, in near term or long term? How do I translate the skill set I have into something that might work in another role? And how do you convince others that the skills that you have are transferable? So a lot of this is going to happen in a networking thing, particularly if you're going from one place to another. If you're going to making a change, it's not going to happen with you applying for a job that doesn't look exactly like what you've been doing before, or doesn't look like a logical extension from where you've been. You need to have somebody at Human sit there and talk to you, and you can start figuring out, okay, what is it I'm trying to sell about that, right? Because they need to look at you long enough to say, not that you're not the square peg that doesn't fit our square hole, but you're actually somebody who I could use somewhere else, or I could use in this position. So, anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say that transferability, I think, can't be underestimated, being able to communicate that, because I think a lot of times people are looking for that, that particular niche.
And particularly in screening interviews, because you know there are 3 different types of interviews. You got your screening interview, you got your hiring manager interview, and then you've got your ring kissing interview.
Your what?
Ring kissing interview.
God.
Because the screening interview is going to be typically, and I'm not trying to wail on HR folks, they got a tough job. They're the ones who help put together the job posting. But what they know when they talk to you is, and this is an exercise I would do with one of the groups I work with, is I'll ask people to bring in a job posting and their resume. And then they hand that to somebody else. That person spends 5 minutes looking at both of them and then interviews them. Because that's essentially what's going on in a screening interview. The screening interview is typically done to say, are you the square peg that fits our square hole? And are you within range of what we're willing to pay for the salary? The hiring manager interview I found much more compelling and more interesting, because that's where you can actually show what you know, and the person can make an assessment, and you can give them suggestions, and there's more give and take. Through all of this, I would keep in mind that, especially when you've been, you know, I was out for 30 years, or I had been working for 30 years, so I had a wealth of information I wanted to share. The problem was I had a wealth of information I wanted to share. And similar to the mailman, you got to keep it tight, all right? So part of this whole process is figuring out what your story is now. So anyway, the other thing I would say is this: important to know who you are, but also where you want to go. Because at the end of it, if you figure out where you want to go, you're not faking it. You know, and I'll throw out, we ask people to put together a list of target employers. And when I'm coaching groups, I'll say, pick it out. You could go through and say, all right, give me best employers in this area. You could go with, who are the companies that I just love what they do? You know, you talk to somebody who's an Apple enthusiast and like, why would I want to work anywhere else? I have no reason to fake it because that's really cool what they do and I want to be part of that. You know, for instance. Another thing is, you could be looking at companies that are like, they're a great company, but boy, could they use somebody like me. And then there's a hook in there for you there as well. Or you could just say, hey, and gosh, in this area there are so many mission-driven organizations. Who's in line with what I care about? You know, dollars and donuts. If you feel strongly about something, there's an organization out there that you ought to be reaching out to. Not to say that you're necessarily going to pay what you got paid before, but you know, there's a trade-off in terms of figuring out how to start into this. So, anyway. The other thing I would mention is you identify these places. Pursue networking into them, even if they don't have jobs posted. You know, I have candidates who say, I got my 50, okay. Unfortunately, only 7 of them are hiring at any moment. I'm like, well, you should be talking to everyone. You should find a way in. Because it doesn't necessarily always happen in the order that you think it was, and there's not always a job posted. But oftentimes you find nothing. So anyway, once you've identified who you are, don't be ashamed to be out there. Now again, this is finding your voice. It's finding a way that makes sense. The other thing I would say is avoid the temptation to claim stuff you don't have. Because if you've gone to the problem, let me go back a step. If you've identified what you're really good at and what you love to do, and I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with somebody when they talk about that sort of thing, they are just animated. They're passionate. They're compelling. They're confident. They're like, Katie, bar the door. There's nothing. I can't stop this person, right? That's exactly where you want to be. When you get down to the point where you're using, see, I lost the name of it, JobScan, to figure out, here's what I ought to augment to make my resume look that much more fabulous. Well, then what happens is, hang on, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Good. Here's some of the tools you're going to need, right? Let's talk about resumes. Resumes are, people obsess about resumes. And oh my gosh, it's so important that I have everything in there. And I'll ask people, the first cut you'll see people will give you a resume that's 5 pages long and they've got everything on there, perfect attendance in kindergarten on through whatever else. It's ridiculous. I'm like, okay, let's go back to square one. How much time does somebody look at a resume?
He said less than.
Yeah. 10 seconds, 20 seconds? So when I constantly ask recruiters this because I'm always curious what their take on it. I say, well, what do you do with dense resumes? I don't even look at them. They're just too much work. Most. It depends upon how big the pile is, right? The other thing to keep in mind, there's two reasons for a resume. One is it looks really cool in the little portfolio here. One is that it's a mission ticket for the interview, right? So that's the 10-second, 20-second. The other side of it is it's going to be the menu for the interview. You are what's for dinner, basically. The thing is that's really kind of cool about that is think about the power you have to actually shape 60 to 70% about what you talk about in the interview. Now, again, I come back to brevity is the soul of it. You have to make your case succinctly. You have to make it while they're still awake. I know when I'm talking to people, I'm like, I'm telling a story, I'm like, oh yeah. You can just see them. Their eyes roll in the back of their head, they're unconscious, they're drooling, it's like, they stop. Okay, I'll stop. You've got to figure out how to make your case and make it. The other thing is, when you avoiding dense resumes, when you think about putting together a resume, what I want you to think about is make the case for yourself. This should be something that is a visual stimulus, right? You give it to them, they talk to you. But it's also a cue for that. You load that up in the sense that I'm putting in their accomplishments I want them to ask me about. Right? I don't tell the full story in the accomplishments. I put the hook in. I don't bury the lead. And like you're saying, accomplishments should be objective, measurable, compelling. All of those are true. They should also be pretty brief. Because the idea is you're going to provide the backstory in your soundtrack. The hope is that they're going to look at it. The other thing, when you're thinking about menu for an interview, we talked about the guys scanning really quick to see if you get in the pile that says, let's talk to them. Once you're in there, most of the time you're talking to a hiring manager. Hiring manager is already swamped, right? They're either down a person because somebody left, or they've gotten so much in the way of new business that she was able to get an add to staff. Either way, that person's looking and saying, oh, I just want to go back to doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also looking and saying, this may be the first time they actually have taken a good look at your resume. So, my mother taught me, you give people eye contact. But if you're there trying to, get over the fact that you're scrambling and suddenly you have this, oh, here come the people, oh, no, I got to interview these people. You're going to want to make eye contact with them, but you're going to be looking down, looking up. And I know this from doing focus groups and in-depth interviews where you hand something to somebody. There's only a certain amount of time they have to digest to grasp stuff. So think about it again from short snippets. Just to have, if I beat that to death. But again, you're baiting the hook. The other thing is you're going to have, let me finish. Part of this is all about having what I like to call plausible affirmability. And that is everything on your resume you should want to talk about. You should be prepared to talk about it. Even if it was a bad left turn you took. You still come back and say, I had a year I spent working at NASDAQ. It was the longest year of my life. And part of it was because I talked my way, I did the Pinocchio thing. I talked my way into a job that was not what I wanted. I wasn't actively engaged in figuring out, do I want this or not? And I was saying, I could be everything you want me to be. Well, 6 months down the road, I'm like, why am I here? So anyway, plausible affirmability. I need to be able to explain that. And if I'm in an interview, I'll say, yeah, I worked here, it was a long job, it was not the right fit for me. And here's what I learned about myself. I learned that I'm a purpose-driven organization person. That's really important to me. Their purpose and mine didn't align, and it's a relatively short discussion, but it's fine. When you're talking to somebody in social, purpose-driven organizations, that resonates with them. If I were talking to Merrill Lynch, that would be less compelling. Anyway, question.
I write, I have international experience, but it goes further back. And it goes pre-internet. I know.
What's that?
I know. So I did marketing work in Japan for a while, and so when I put that, if I were to put that down, it's in some ways it's not relevant because then you don't have the internet skills because it's
Why you put it in there?
Well, because it's you worked abroad, and before that I worked in London, and it's you take these advantages and you work abroad, and so that's why I would want to put those things. But it also shows, he's older, and but it also shows geez, these skills are so out of date. Go ahead.
Thank you for the cue on the older. It's unfair. When you sit down across from somebody, they're thinking, I was at this group at one point, the guy said, he said something like, yeah, I was there, in his elevator pitch, he started by talking about how he helped shape, the internet policy when the internet first came out. I'm like, sorry. I said, I was there when fire was invented. You don't see me claiming credit for it, okay? But you want to be cognizant of that. Now, there's things that I would point out also that, gosh, you don't have to look in the news too long to see a bunch of young people who could really use some adults in the room running companies they should be running. Uber, Mark Trump. The list goes, gosh, the guy in the booster seat was in front of Congress last week.
Yeah.
Understand that you have advantages. Now, the trick is to find a way to not be screened out before you get into the interview, and then be very comfortable with who you are. When I've had good traction for things, it's where we're looking for somebody who can run a staff, who can work with management teams, who can mentor young talent. And all that stuff is in this room. And here's the thing, wisdom comes through mistakes. You have to have that.
So the fact that it happened abroad, I should just eliminate.
But I didn't get there yet.
Okay.
The abroad thing, I would do this. Where I would put that is probably other related work. I would say, you know, job title, position, and where you work. I wouldn't be explaining a whole lot of accomplishments from that unless it was particularly germane.
No.
But what it says is you are a seasoned worker, seasoned international, you know, you understand, you've been in other places and worked in other places. You know,
Okay.
it helps round you out, but it isn't something I would cling to and say this is something that's hugely valuable. Now, one of the things that we typically say is don't go back beyond 15 years in terms of your resume. And I get disgusted by it because of the ageism thing, and I didn't do it for the longest time. I had my dates on my resume, and I even have the stone tablets right there. But the reality of it is that at some point you're going to be in a room with them, and they're going to say, gee, you're not the 25-year-old I thought you were. And frankly, a lot of times they want somebody who's not 25. So you've got to find the right spot. The other thing I would say is, going back to this whole pick your spots, part of picking the places you want to go is figuring out where would I feel like I'm comfortable? Where would they embrace what I bring to the party? And, you know, I can't, if I'm an employer and I'm a smart employer, and I believe with that, part of where I would be looking for is I want people who have experience. I want people who've made mistakes. I want people who have wisdom. I want people who are open to new things and like to learn new things. And the challenge you have is too often it gets associated, well, if you're this age, therefore, you know, you're full up. You don't have any more new knowledge coming in, and that's not where you ought to be. You don't want, don't let them do that to you. So anyway, the trick is, again, the other thing I would say is this is all about networking, especially when you're at the levels we're at and the age we're at. You have established networks. You have people who work with you. Now, I'm forgetting that. I'm not sure I'm not looking. And okay, this is just one thing I want to point out. Your network is pretty broad. Now, it's not just people who you've worked for. I used to think, well, gosh, you know, the guy who was CEO here, he's going to be a good network for me down the road. Well, at the time that happened, when I got left last time, he's retired. Where does that help me? So, you know, it's going to be champions and mentors. It's going to be people who you've worked for, either in a boss capacity or as clients. It's going to be people you worked with. It's going to be, this is the one I love, former subordinates. People you've mentored. People say, you know what, I learned so much from that guy, bring him in. Okay. Younger people. Vendors, another great one. You know, I worked in market research for a long time. A vendor, the beauty of talking to a vendor is they're talking to people who are your peers. They're going to companies like that, they know where openings are. The other side of it is there's something in it for them to place you. I've got a friendly face over there, and now I've got a better chance of making it. So, anyway, and then the other thing is, you know, professionals, this is the one that's more the stalking part, figuring out people who you're interested in talking to and who can get you in and give you insights about other places. The other thing I would not diminish is organizations like this. Just having other people who are in transition who know what you're going through is hugely important. That's the community side. The other side can also be a very good networking thing, is that oftentimes, you know, one of the things we usually ask at the beginning of the meeting would be, what companies or employers are you particularly interested in? Because that opens up, oh, I know someone there. So anyway, going back real quick. LinkedIn is another tool that's going to be hugely important for you. People get focused on LinkedIn from the perspective of, I'm going to be discovered and here's my profile, or portfolio, as the case may be. The reality of it is the power of LinkedIn for most people is the database. It's how many people are you connected with that can find your way into. So I've identified, here's my 50 companies I'm particularly interested in. Through LinkedIn, I can probably find my way into 12 of these, get introduced to them. The power is, the other thing, you know, to keep in mind, it should be up to date. Now, one other thing I want to say about resumes. How important are resumes?
There's a ticket.
They get you into yeah.
It depends.
Necessary but not sufficient.
It depends. It literally is. If I were somebody looking for, I'm an employer, and somebody gave me a resume, somebody said, you need to talk to this person. She was great. She was the best I've ever had at this job. She organized, she did all this stuff. Does the resume all that important then?
No.
I would argue, frankly, you could have it written on a napkin in Crayola if you had that kind of endorsement coming in. And it really wouldn't matter much. In fact, one of the people I hired, the best hires I ever made, had one of the worst resumes I've ever saw. And years later, I'm like, what was up with that resume? But the reality was, she came in so highly recommended. I had a great conversation with her, and she knew her stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I don't care what the resume says. Because part of it goes back to this whole premise that, boy, people who are good job seekers are going to be great employees. This whole thing is about finding the right fit, right? Anyway, so other thing on LinkedIn, you want to make sure it's up to date. Minimally, a picture. And ideally, it's not a picture with you with a cap with 2 beer cans and the straws coming down. It is actually a picture of you in a professional setting. Additionally, recommendations from people with whom you've worked. These could be clients, these could be bosses, whatever else. The beauty of this, as distinct from, I got a letter of recommendation from my old boss. Nobody sees that. They see this. You know why? A, it's on your LinkedIn profile. The other side of it is, you want somebody to back it up. It's linked to their profile. So you go to their profile and you'll see a recommendation for you on it. It's a very strong statement. I was talking to a couple of recruiters and I said, one of the things they do when they're putting together their pool of candidates, they'll look and say, they'd love to see these recommendations. And ideally, the recommendations are specific in terms of here's how we work together, here's what she did, etc. Another thing, we recommend that you have at least 500 connections on LinkedIn. I know, that seems like a lot, right? I don't want you guys hanging out at the metro station. What I'm looking for is, though, find ways to find, one of the things I'll do is ask people to go in and do a search on current and past employers. So do it on a single employer base. Say you worked at IBM, everybody know current and past. Because what it'll give you a rarefied list and you can connect with them. But the idea is this. If I have 500 connections, if each of my connections has 500 connections, and each one of them is distinct, I could arguably connect with 250,000 people on LinkedIn. And that is basically, I am one introduction away from that many people. And that's what you want. And it just gets bigger as you go further. But the idea is when you do, you look at a position on LinkedIn, it'll say, this many people from your old school work here, or this many people from, this many people you're connected with are here. So that's all very important. The other side is, and by the way, I can't say strongly enough, Colleen McKenna is great. Go see her, she's terrific. She's very pragmatic. She looks at LinkedIn not just from this perspective in terms of here's how you present yourself, but also from the perspective that here's how you can use this and warm up this network using this tool. So she's really good. But one of the things that she argues, and I think she's spot on, is your LinkedIn profile, the top of that should be you explaining who you are. There's a lot of what in this process, but this is about who you are. What are you passionate about? What do you enjoy? What are you excited about? Accomplishment stories, we talked about that. Again, proof that you walk the walk. You go through your thought process. They make you more memorable. You want to make sure that they're strategic, succinct, and relevant. So, part of it is if you're putting together your resume on your accomplishment, you're tailing your resume. The way you tailor your resume is the accomplishments you list in it, right? I'm not arguing you should do it for every position you apply for. But if you're looking at, path A, path B, and path C, you probably could identify different accomplishments that better situate you for each of them. But also, understand, you're loading the deck, you're trying to say, when I go in there and have a conversation with a person, dollars to donuts, they're going to ask me about this, and I want them to ask me about this. If not, then I've got to find a way to wedge it into a conversation. Okay, yeah. You talked about network? Mm-hmm. Also, purposeful networking. I love the title that you guys use because that's exactly what you need to be doing. I, for the longest time, was going out on networking meetings and saying, well, it's a nice opportunity to meet somebody. I can show them I'm a reasonably engaging guy who knows something about what they do, and then we'll have a good time, and then I'll bat my eyes and they'll hire me. Did a lot of eye batting and nothing happened. The reality is what you want to be doing is thinking, and think about it from a sales perspective, what do I want to accomplish at the end of these meetings? At the end of the day, what do I want to know from this person? Now, you're not going to go in there and say, do you have any jobs? That's kind of a high-risk proposition. What you're going to do, though, is you're going to have a conversation with them and ask them, very interested in your company or industry, et cetera. Tell me a little bit about how you got into it. Tell me about what you see down the road for it. You know, tell me about the types of skill sets that people have who are successful now or who will be successful in the future need to have. Which then gives you the segue to say, here's a little bit about what I have. And what you're trying to get a handle on is, what do I need to do to be able to translate what I've been doing here over to there? How do I transition? What are the stepping stones I need to do? Is it, well, you could do this, but you need to have another degree. Or you do this and you need to have a certification. Or if you had a little bit of experience in here, that would make you that much more compelling. All those things are food for thought. And some things you can easily rectify, and others, you know, it's going to take a little while. Because some of this is depending on how lofty your goal is in terms of what you want to do, it's going to take some time. But if you're on mission and you feel like you're making progress, a huge part of this whole process is being able to declare victory every day. I did something to move the ball forward today. What is that? Because a huge part of this, maybe I come back to that. I keep forgetting, there's all these surprises. Who put these slides up here?
Yeah.
Who thought of that? But a huge part of this whole process is figuring out how to manage your mojo. How do you make sure that you arrive with a positive, confident outlook? How do you keep yourself from going nuts? It's all there. I mean, and there's some pretty scary statistics about long-term unemployment. Our Department of Labor guy, I'm sure can vouch for it in terms of incidents of alcoholism, depression, suicide, divorce, etc. This is serious business, guys. And a huge part of this is figuring out what can you do to make yourself feel better about the whole process. Because I will be here that it's not you. It is not. The process stinks, and it's very demeaning, and you get. And this is the happy comedic part of the process. It's like, but at the end of the day, you can't give up. You know, and there are people out there who want to hear from you and would love to talk to you. And the trick is, you got to banish the ghosts from your mind about it. Just figure out, this is who I am, this is what I bring, I'm unabashedly happy with who I am. I don't know, you remember that there was a commercial about Southern Comfort? They had this fat old guy walking in a swimsuit. You remember that? He was so completely, like, he was all out there, he was all in. And I was just thinking, that's how you have to be. You don't want to dress like that in an interview, but that's kind of who you want to be. It's like,
Southern Comfort home.
yeah. Good point, thanks. Okay, networking tips. Here's some ways to make it easier. First of all, go with a friend. Find a wing person. And if it's a complete bust, at least you go out to lunch with them and have a good time. Secondly, keep your expectations low. I used to go in there and say, I'm going to go to this cattle call. I know there's going to be this many people, and we're all going to do this little dance and talk about what we want to do. And then, and then I finally talk myself into going, and usually what would happen is, that was great. That wasn't so bad. And you know what? I ended up with 3 or 4 cards of people that I wanted to connect with. Always had business cards. The nice thing about a business card is you give it to them, they usually give you one back. And then you're in control, right? Then you can contact them. Then you reach out to them on LinkedIn. The other thing that I love is, and there are a number of different organizations, Networking After, no, the other one, Washington Network? Yeah, Washington Network, right? Yeah. What I love about what they do is they have speakers. You go see a speaker, you can see a presentation, you learn something new, and the beauty of it is kind of like going to a Halloween party. You have a built-in reason for talking to somebody that's not about what you don't want to talk about immediately. Because the problem in DC is, anybody, first question you get asked at any gathering?
What'd you do?
What's the last question anybody here wants to answer?
What'd you do?
Looking for a job.
Yeah. But own it. The thing is, and I run to a group of guys the other night. I was coaching a group, and I said, I tell them I'm a consultant. I'm like, shrewd. The reality is, if you tell them you're a consultant, do they ever get around to thinking, you might be looking for a job? and I might know one. So you know, you got to find a way to own it and be comfortable with it. It's not personal. It's just part of the process. The other thing is, and I've never been really good about this, but work the room. And by that I don't mean, oh, there's a CEO over there, I'm going to go talk to them, but rather start thinking about, you see somebody by themselves over there, go talk to them. They'll be happy to talk to you because they're not alone anymore, right? Now, if they turn out to be really clingy and stuff, you know, that's where you have the weak person. But the idea is start thinking about, which groups are more likely to, if you see two people talking, go be the third, unless they're talking intensely, whatever. But start specking it out, saying, oh, where do I want to be? Who do I want to talk to? And the idea is also think, okay, after 5 minutes or so, move on to the next one. But be forthright. Tell your story. Don't be ashamed of being in transition. Okay. This one, superpower may be overstating it. It's more a matter of figuring out how you present well and how you present best. I have a couple examples of this. I had a woman I was coaching she had set up a catering business for a national chain, right? And she was really frustrated. She didn't have a great resume. She didn't like the whole interviewing process. I said, well, you established things, you sold this, you did this much in revenues. How did you do it? She says, well, I'd appear on site with the food. And I'd introduce myself, and here's some samples. I said, why aren't you doing that now? I mean, you don't have to bring food, but be on site. I mean, if that's your real you, if that's how you present, do it. I have another person who I work with, who really sharp guy, very engaging person, ended up going to a job fair, an IT job fair. And he's in our demographic. And he shows up, and he's looking, he's clearly the oldest person in the room by 20 years, right? With the exception of the hirers. And this is a government affair, and he says, they're all clustered about one table. It's the CIA. So he sees all these other people, he goes and starts talking to them. And he ends up establishing conversations with them, and he walks away with three positive opportunities that wouldn't have occurred if he just applied online. He was there. He made a good impression. He was personable. And particularly in an introverted space like IT, if you can show up and show that you can carry a conversation, and no offense, I mean, I come from a whole family of STEM folks, and I wail on them at home when I get a chance, but and I do burst spices. But if you can find a place where you shine and you're different, that's a great thing. I had another woman I was working with she billed herself as a fearless marketer. She did cold calling and this sort of thing. She would show up, and I was talking to her, said, tell me a little bit about yourself, because she says fearless, I'm like, well, I love that. And she says, I said, well, tell me what it's like. When I ask, one of the questions I love to get an answer to is, tell me about yourself. How do you flavor that so that it's memorable, right? And I coaxed it out of her. She said, well, yeah. I said, I'll bet you were a pistol in high school. She said, yeah. She says, she grew up in a small town in upstate New York, which immediately resonated with me because I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. She says, yeah, I was the girl who got dumped by the high school quarterback the week before prom. And I'm like, ooh, that's sad. Keep in mind, this is never take no for an answer. She reaches out to the rival team's high school quarterback and asks him to the prom and ends up dating him for 2 years. And now I've got a Taylor Swift song. But the reality is, if you tell that story and say, I don't take no for an answer, I'm like, you've exemplified it. And I guarantee you, they had some code word when they talked about her. She just got hired. And I'll bet it was something like, yeah, did you talk to prom girl yet? Something like that, whatever it was. Because it literally, it's like, when you hear something like, oh, that's super good, I gotta share that. I go home and I tell my wife the stories I hear during the day, and she's like, that's great. Anyway, but one of the things, again, it isn't just about figuring out what your message is, it's how do you best deliver it. Some people aren't particularly effective in person, but they're really good at writing letters. Or how do you communicate? How do you connect with people? How do you get yourself out there in a way that's compelling? And the other thing is you've got to manage emotion. And part of this is, from my perspective, you've got to figure out, it's going to be a roller coaster, right? You're going to have points where I'm on top of the world, I've got 3 3 job opportunities right now. I'm excited about all 3 of them. Then a week later, you gotta find out 2 of them didn't pan out, and the 3rd one was a total scam. They just wanted me to do the work for them, or whatever it was, right? Well, when you wake up in that fetal position, you're not in any good shape to do a job search, right? So what I tell people is, when you're up here and everything's going well, use that energy. Set up more meetings, do whatever you can to build out your LinkedIn profile, do whatever you can to push the ball forward. When you're down here, step away from it. Go do something else to get you back to your strong, happy place. I don't care if it's crocheting, exercising, prayer, whatever it is that helps you get to that spot, because it's going to be like that. That's just the nature of the beast. But the trick is to ride the right way. Anyway, I think that's it. Questions?
Can I just throw one out? Oh, shall we?
Go ahead, no,
Oh,
no,
okay.
go back.
What's your thought about tailoring resumes? For specific positions. I do that limited basis because I just don't have time to, and I don't hear a strong endorsement that that's necessarily the way to go anyway.
I would agree. And again, I think it's part of really understanding, starting with your understanding of what you are and what you do. And the other side is, for me, the tailoring of the resume is more about, your resume is not going to change in terms of the title and the scope of the responsibilities. The way you tailor it is by changing which accomplishments you highlight. And there's certain things you're going to say, look, if I was employee of the century, that's going to be on every resume I put together, right? But there are other things that say, if I'm looking at Plan A, this one aligns me much better with Plan A, so I put that in there. But I wouldn't get too hung up on it. Part of it, I think, is really, gosh, it is dizzying. There's so many things you could do, and I think that's part of the whole challenge with this. Is I could search online all day. It's kind of like you go on Facebook and suddenly 4 hours.
Exactly.
Where does that?
Question in the back?
Yeah, I have 2 questions actually. The first one is on LinkedIn.
Sorry.
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
What about LinkedIn?
On LinkedIn, I have maybe 200 contacts.
Okay.
I used to have more. And my problem was people would, my network, those I was connected with on LinkedIn, they would ask me, refer me to this one.
Yeah.
And I didn't know the people.
Okay.
I removed some of the people on LinkedIn because I didn't know them.
Yeah.
So I couldn't say anything like, okay, who is this one? So how do you deal with that?
Not well.
Okay.
I have a fair number of people that I'm connected with on LinkedIn, and I don't remember where I met. But here's the thing: when you're in career transition, if it's clearly not a scam, and if somebody's reaching out to you and there seems to be some reason they're in your professional space or they know somebody, then be very open to connecting with them. That doesn't mean you have to be good friends. And the other thing I would say is when somebody asks me to make connections, and then first I'll say, I'm happy to have you look at my connections on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect you with people if I know them. But yeah, I think it's fair. I've had other circumstances where the other thing I would think about is, LinkedIn is not just your resume, and it's not just your window on the world. If they're looking to hire you and they're bringing you in, darn well they're looking at your LinkedIn profile. And part of it you might want to look through and say, is everybody on there, if they were to contact them in the random case that they knew and then, would they say good things about me? That would be the one thing I would look through and say, And I've had to, then I had the people eliminated so it didn't matter.
What's your thought on I have a Hotmail address.
Wow. I was there when fire was invented too.
Gmail.
That's okay.
Because I don't like Gmail. I have a Gmail address, but I actually prefer the way Hotmail
You know what
works.
I did? I took in Gmail and I hated the way the whole managing the account. I pulled it through Outlook, and I know that makes me even more of a Luddite than you, but it works. So the problem is there's certain things connote. If you have AOL, you have Yahoo.
I don't have AOL.
Hotmail is
AOL and AOL.
Yeah.
You don't tell anybody about AOL. Because
I should, but do I need?
That'd be a little secret.
Yeah.
Do you recommend getting rid of the Hotmail?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, most folks are out there with Gmail, and I don't particularly love my Gmail address, and I really should change that.
Yeah.
So that kind of begs the question, what is acceptable? I have a Y-mail myself, is that considered AOL? Love it too.
Same thing, just free email.
What's that?
Ymail, I'm not familiar with that. Is that just like another free email service?
Yeah, it's just like Gmail, but it's the original
I-
Yahoo Mail.
Oh.
But they call it Y-mail.
I guess they call it Ymail, yeah.
Yeah.
Yahoo again, would I think, raise a little bit of a flag.
Yeah, sometimes the other side I would say is this, like, now I've got, I'm somewhere about 8,000 emails sitting in there, and I'm like, I'm not going to go through any of these. It's like, it might be time to start a whole new one and leave that,
Email bankruptcy,
Yeah,
maybe just
yeah,
out.
exactly.
Hey, Bruce, you might have alluded to this. There was discussion about tailoring your resume.
Yeah.
And you kind of said, nah, maybe, but what about the cover letter?
Oh, the
How
cover
does
letter for
that-
sure.
How does that marry? Well, I hear yes.
So first of all, you still support cover letters, because we have a lot of
Right.
speakers who.
We're all over the place.
Okay.
And is it worthwhile to write one, to tailor to the job description, bringing stuff forward, all those strategies, and when do they go into the garbage can? That might be a whole 2 hours.
Yeah. All right, buckle up, people.
That's where I do more of my tailoring, actually, is with the cover letter.
I know, I agree with the cover. Here's the
Put it
thing.
down on the recommended thing for
Next one.
review sheet.
Fair enough.
Cover letter part of it, from my perspective, is you hear the quote that I think it was from like only 9% of cover letters get read.
Really?
That's what I've heard. Now I'm saying, okay, that's great, but this is kind of like, another specious. Keep in mind, I'm a research guy. I said, reality is, 85% of car accidents happen within 2.5 miles of your home. I'm like, well, it's really dangerous on 2.5 miles of my home. No, it's because I'm there most of the time. This one, I come out of it and say, I think, yes, maybe 9% get read, but I will guarantee you, most of the people who were in that pool of the select few, their cover letter gets read. And you need every little piece of nudge you can get over that. Now, that being said, don't start that cover letter with, I'm writing you in response to your blah, blah, blah. Because immediately I'm feeling sleepy and so are they. Talk to me, connect with me. A typical cover letter should be 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph is, this is why I'm contacting you. And if you can do something that brings it home as to personally, start from the heart, what's important to me about what you do, that's huge. And then the rest of it's, the other 2 paragraphs about why they should be interested in you. Does that help?
Oh yeah, you had a second question?
Yeah.
That's right, I cut you off. Go ahead, last
My
question.
second question is about interview.
Uh-huh.
I had an interview recently, and during the interview, they were asking me, 2 years from now, how will you measure your success? Is that an interview question? Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, it is. I don't particularly love it.
I
but,
didn't know how to answer that.
Yeah. Buckets of gold bullion. I don't know. It's like, I mean, literally, you have to figure that out. And some of those questions are just so. All right, how many of you guys have a good answer for your biggest failure? Okay.
Biggest weakness.
Biggest weakness, biggest failure, okay. Typically, when they're asking that, the first thing they're looking for is humility. I was in a group the other night, and I asked this question. I said, here's some tough questions you're going to be forced with. And I had a young guy over here and an older guy over here. And the young guy said, well, current thought now is you should be out there failing early and failing often. And the guy over there is like, yeah, that sounds like a bunch of hooey. Own it. Because part of it is really, what they're looking for is, in that question, my estimation is humility. Hopefully it's not catastrophic. I'm sorry I spilled beer on the fail-safe football. But rather it's something that could be, and what did you do? How did you solve it? What did you learn from it? And what have you adjusted going forward?
Once again, Bruce, thank you so much. Brief memento from 40 Plus. We hope you think about us. We definitely want your feedback, as someone else mentioned. We take these very seriously, so take a moment, share your thoughts with us. We do a little drawing for a gift card at the end of the month.